Did you know you're talking about a revolution? It sounds like a whisper.
Hello, welcome to another show of New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. We have a show today that we're going to be introducing a couple of the co-chairs from the Poor People's Campaign. And what is the Poor People's Campaign? Is this something new? Is this something old? What exactly are you guys working on and soon?
He roamed the South, trying to gain support for Poor People's Campaign. Its goals: full employment, a guaranteed income, and decent housing for every American.
The campaign would recruit among all races, bring them to Washington, force the government to respond, a nonviolent army of the poor.
All working together to solve the problem of poverty.
Hi, my name is Reverend Jason Wells. I'm a co-chair for the New Hampshire Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. But I'm also the executive director of the New Hampshire Council of Churches and organize among a large number of faith groups here in the state of New Hampshire.
Hi, I'm Deborah Opramolla. I am a co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign here in New Hampshire. I am also a disability organizer, and I work with different groups to put forth disability work. And it pleases me to know and to work with everyone to get our issues put forward in New Hampshire.
So the Poor People's Campaign here in New Hampshire has been going on locally for about the past 4 years now, but our roots are actually much longer and much deeper than that. I'm glad that we're doing this program, or at least recording the program right before Martin Luther King Day, because the Poor People's Campaign was the creation of Reverend Dr. King. It was formed in 1967. Dr. King, of course, had as a leader for the civil rights movement, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act had passed. And in 1967, Dr. King was turning his attention to 3 areas of concern that were interrelated to him. Those areas included poverty, racism, and militarism, or the war economy, he sometimes called it, which he was speaking of the Vietnam War at the time. And he called these things the three, or the triple evil. The 3 things that are deeply interrelated: racism, poverty, and militarism. And he saw the connections everywhere. And in 2017, Reverend Dr. William Barber and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris began to bring this campaign back, adding to the evils the destruction of the environment. So we have concerns about the interrelated problems of poverty, racism, militarism, and ecological devastation that we're trying to address, and we see them as interrelated. And the way that we believe we can overcome such major obstacles, which are so deeply intertwined, is that we come together. We come together across lines of faith, race, along lines of income and class, all of our different interests and advocacy. We are an organization that likes to unite people and bring our voices together to create the change in the face of these great evils.
This must be interesting in a time period with a pandemic, people losing work, and the United States being the only country that the citizens don't have health care as a basic right.
Rick, this is during the pandemic, before the pandemic, actually. The PPC, under research, learned that we have 140 million poor and low-wage workers. Now, because of the pandemic, we believe that that number is really around 180 million people who are have been thrown into poverty and low-wage jobs. The condition that many families find themselves are Now they're food insecure. They're not making enough money to be able to even stay in a rental or pay their mortgage. The economic downturn is worse than the Depression era. So, how are we going to come back economically? We're still trying to figure that out. But unfortunately, what the New Hampshire PPC has found out is that because of the COVID pandemic, many hospitals are rationing medicine. As soon as they have an upsurge of, of patients, they determine the quality of care. So, along ableist, discriminatory lines, many disabled are finding themselves not having the same access to quality health care. And many being given the option, families given the options of saying, well, you this person doesn't deserve to be resuscitated, so we're going to let them go. We've determined that they're DNR. And we have seen on the national level, this is happening quite a bit. And now in New Hampshire, when we're at capacity, it is happening. New Hampshire has asked the governor more than once, along with 25 other agencies that we have joined, to have a crisis standard of care plan that is accessible, transparent, run by the DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, to oversight it. And the governor found no value in that. And we're still asking for that because this is not going to be our last pandemic.
With your major event coming up for MLK Day, and we're probably in one of the most dangerous points of the pandemic right now. I mean, it's being estimated that this month is going to be the highest death rate in the country. How are you going to accomplish this?
When we go outside, I insist on people wearing masks. If you can't wear a mask, you can't come. And in many instances like this event, because there is an uptake, I ask people to double mask. But for security reasons, we are not going to be outside. We are going to be in our individual cars. So when we decorate the cars, you must be masked. You must social distance. And anything that someone else has touched, before we have somebody else touch it, we disinfect it. We follow strict CDC rules, and leadership in the PPC does not negotiate those rules. It's for everybody's safety.
I just wanted to add, about a month back, the Poor People's Campaign did a car caravan outside of the State House that was highly successful. We had about 20 people come. We were worried about some of the same concerns then about COVID transmission, and had people circle the building in their cars and honking horns. It was a highly effective way to get people to look our way, to read the signs that were on our cars, and it kept people safe. So our message got out there without transmitting COVID in any way. But it was a very effective way to draw attention to our claims about the crisis standards of care that Debbie's talking about.
One of the most interesting things I think I see about the Poor People's Campaign, that it addresses all the issues of anyone that's disadvantaged. I mean, we've had a reallocation of wealth for the past 40 years where it's moved from the working class, middle class, the lower class, and it seems to be the whole middle's either going north or south. There's no middle anymore. And I think that was one of the biggest interest I had in the campaign. I mean, we're looking at the way they're doing this stimulus and money. We're the only country that didn't pay the workers to be at home, and then the workers were able to pay their bills, and the stimulus for businesses was much less. It's pretty much the way it's happened. Our stimulus has happened is it's gone to the richest, and good luck with your $600 for 8 months or $1,200.
we strongly believe, and jump in, Jason, that when you raise up from the bottom, everybody raises up. And so when we raise from the bottom and give the workers and the low-wage workers what they need, a living wage is a right. $7.25 is not something we can't even rent by ourselves. 40 hours a week is $7.25. So when we raise up the wages, when we make healthcare accessible, then everybody raises up.
One of the phrases that we use in the Poor People's Campaign a great deal is when you change the narrator, you change the narrative when you change the narrator. And when we start listening to different stories, like Debbie was saying, when we start from the bottom rather than the top, the whole story changes. I remember in the pandemic, Governor Sununu drew together a group of people to talk about economic recovery for the state. How would we economically recover from the pandemic? And who's at the table? Who's the narrator talking about the problems of our economy? But they're industry lobbyists. They are people who are representing our hotels, our vacation spots, our golf resorts. They were the ones talking about economic recovery. I guarantee you, if you change the narrator, if we talk to our poorest, if we talk to our workers, if we talk to our low-wage people about what does economic recovery mean, you're going to get a totally different narrative. It's a totally different story than what the hotel and restaurant lobbyists think economic recovery looks like. I think you're going to get much more, Rick, what you were just talking about, that of that focus, the focus on individual workers, and which not only helps them economically, but also helps keeps people healthier and safer as individual people. So you start to see the interrelated character of these concerns.
That when I've taken a look at, I've worked both union and non-union, and when I worked union, as an electrician, part of it was stability of the economics. The building and construction industry changes rapidly, and it didn't matter where I worked as an electrician. When I was union, it all went towards I didn't lose my benefits because my benefits were paid to the union hall as opposed to each individual contractor. And every time I went to work with someone else, it was like a 9 months laydown time in between the insurance becoming active. And then, of course, it was pre-existing conditions. It almost seems like businesses, if medical coverage was part of the package, that businesses could compete on the ability to provide a product, not their ability to withhold benefits from workers, because everybody would be starting from an even point. Everybody has coverage. The costs are the same across the boards.
Good evening. My name's Janara. It's an honor to be here. I want to share with you what a single-payer healthcare system would mean to millions of our brothers and sisters. Single payer would guarantee healthcare as a human right. Currently, 44 million Americans are uninsured and another 38 million have inadequate healthcare insurance, or what we call the underinsured. I am one of those 38 million. With a plan that costs $7,000 per year, a deductible of $5,000, and an outrageous amount of co-pays, I sometimes can't afford the medications that I need. 1 in 5 Americans can't afford to fill necessary prescriptions. I've been forced to put off necessary health care because sometimes I know I can't afford to pay the bill. Thank you. Several months ago, I was awakened at 3 a.m. by a sudden asthma attack. I rushed to get my nebulizer, but after 3 treatments, it wasn't working. I decided to try another one. and the panic began sinking in, and all I could think about was the last attack that landed me in the emergency room and left me with a $1,600 bill. I resorted to at-home remedies, and within 2 hours, my symptoms finally started to subside. A trip to the clinic followed. After a battery of breathing treatments, I was sent home with 5 new prescriptions. Upon filling them, the cost was so incredible, I could only afford to fill 4. The inhaler I so desperately needed was $268. In my shock and disbelief, the pharmacist confided in me that he sees this all the time. I left the pharmacy with no inhaler. The next day I returned with the money after deciding to not pay a bill. The pharmacy technician ringing my order actually apologized as she told me the total cost. After some discussion, she too confided in me that she sees this all the time, but mostly with insulin. We exchanged looks of horror and deep sadness. What I'm describing to you is far too common in America because of the greed and corruption of those in power of our for-profit health insurance and pharmaceutical companies. Americans are forced to put off necessary procedures and medications simply because they cannot afford them. Just one military contract to Boeing would cost $25 billion. That's about as much as it would cost to expand the Affordable Care Act and provide health insurance to millions in 14 states. I could share a dozen more atrocious stories. People in America are in deep despair, and when we take the time to listen, we understand their pain. It is time for a moral revolution in this country. In a land of plenty, I see far too many of my neighbors being left behind. It's time to guarantee health care as a human right. That's why I'm part of the PPC, and I'm going to the 2020 March on Washington. Thank you.
Medicare for all. And I prefer to say quality healthcare access for all. Medicare has its own problems that are built in. We do have to talk about quality healthcare, but we have to talk about what that looks like. To jump to other countries, when you look around the world, they have very different models, and some of them work very successfully, and some of them do not. So I think we have to move, the PPC and everyone is moving away from the slogan and getting down to the policy work that we need to present. We know that everyone having access to health care makes everyone healthier. You don't have to worry about pre-existing conditions, but there's some systems in place in the United States that we have to be aware of. We have systemic racism. We have institutional racism. So will that quality health care look the same in a poor community as it does in a wealthy community? And that's what we need to make sure of. And in order to get there, we're going to have to do policy work.
What's the best way for someone to become more active with the Poor People's Campaign? What resources are available? How do they get in touch with you? Where are you located? And what's going on?
The best way to get active in the Poor People's Campaign is to go to New Hampshire poorpeoplescampaign.org and sign up on our page, and that gives us your contact information. We're in the process of reaching out to communities we believe in the impacted storyteller, the narrator. And since we work on the model of with and not for, we need to reach out to communities, and we're in the beginning of that process.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is for people who are on Facebook or Twitter, on both of those sites, you can search for New Hampshire, spelled out, New Hampshire PPC. Whenever there is an event or an action or an educational program, a planning event, it is posted on those sites as well. So for people who are Facebook and Twitter people, New Hampshire PPC is the place to search so that you can be alerted to upcoming events and get educated, get informed, and get involved.
I think Moral Mondays are important, but I want to reach people to say national issues are good, but we're really beginning to focus on New Hampshire issues. We just came out of election. The focus was in the South. And now it's time to bring the focus back to New Hampshire. We're capable of looking at the big picture and the state picture. And in order to do outreach, we're spending much more time looking at the state issues.
It's one of the fundamental principles of our campaign that the most harmful and restrictive policies are always passed at the state level. And a state focus, even though we're a national movement, the state focus is really should be front and center. Some examples might be that we do see voter suppression happening on the national scale, but voter suppression laws are made at the state level. They are overcome at the state level. We're worried about poverty nationwide, but we certainly know that minimum wage and right to work laws are set at the state level. So we keep our eyes on what's happening at the state, even though we won't take our eye off the national scene as well.
One of the campaigns that we were successful with in getting done is pushing the governor to have a diversity and inclusion task force. We sort of mentioned that several times, and that did come to fruition. But you have to remember, when we're in campaigns, we are not in isolation. We work with collaborating partners. So several issues that we work with and that we put forth are our joint ventures, because we are an intersectional fusion movement, which means is that we just don't look at what we perceive as our issues, but we work with people who have similar issues to get movement done across the state. And that's our focus right now, is the state.
I would look at two things for how I understand the success of the New Hampshire Poor People's Campaign. One of them was actually during what we called the 40 days of moral action that we did in 2018. We actually, for 40 days, for week after week after week on Mondays, we brought large numbers of people to the State House, speaking up on these interrelated issues. Many of us were arrested in acts of civil disobedience during that time. And while we were not a tactical campaign in the sense that we got a bill passed or a bill rejected, but we were there to get a message out. And every time that we came, our message that there are 140 million poor and low-wage people in the United States, we got that message out again. And when we were arrested and that would get in the news, we would make our message again. So we were able to keep bringing a message and raising up our voice in all of these different venues that sometimes stops if you just get the vote you want in the Congress. So we continue to do that, which I think is a big success. And I think one of the other successes I've seen is that the Poor People's Campaign is here for long haul fusion organizing. We're not here for a short-term campaign to say, once we get a minimum wage, we're done. We are here to bring groups together, especially the advocacy groups that may not be working together. Our homeless advocates might not be working well with the disability advocates, who may or may not be working well with the veterans advocates and the voting rights people. And we want to bring all of those groups together because we do see these issues as interrelated. And so we want to make sure that the activists, the advocates, and the organizers are themselves united. And that takes long-term work.
That I wanted to cover here is there's been, well, the protests, well, what took place in the Capitol recently is hard to call it a protest. It's more like an insurrection and trying to stop a democracy from functioning properly. There's been a lot of feedback in regards to the treatment of activists as opposed to what took place at the Capitol. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
What I saw was when other activists than the white terrorist that was with us on Wednesday, they're ready. They're willing to tear gas. They're willing to use their billy clubs. They're willing to fire rubber bullets, and they were not willing to do that. So what does that mean to me? As a woman of color, I look at it and say, this is a perfect example of white privilege. This is a perfect example of white fear. Lo and behold, for the first time, because of hard work that was done in Georgia, Georgia flipped blue. And I never thought it would, but there were people on the ground who got the non-voters or the skeptical voters out to the polls. And it doesn't matter to me because I'm nonpartisan, but the work that was done to deny that and there was a difference between marching because you thought the information, the election was stolen for you and that misinformation, you believe that information, versus someone marching for a social justice issue about please stop killing us. Please, please listen to the social justice. This has got to stop. You've had 400 years of this. Please now stop. And their reaction to that is the same reaction that they had when Martin Luther King crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So that just tells me they're scared. And so when people get really scared when change is happening, so I take it as they're scared. They're going to use their white privilege, but something must be making them afraid. And it's the willingness to do the social justice work among our organizations, and it's getting done.
But the Poor People's Campaign is deeply studies and lives out Martin Luther King's vision for nonviolence. If anybody came to our protests, if anybody came to risk arrest, they had hours of training in nonviolence and in the spiritual practices behind them, which is a fascinating thing to enter into in its own right. But it demonstrates a different kind of power. And I think Debbie was right to point out that power it makes those who are in control of our systems fearful. It makes them tremble in their boots. But it is a real power when we bring the force that comes from nonviolence and that kind of activism that we take from King and Gandhi through the Poor People's Campaign.
I especially want to thank the two of you for joining us, and especially the viewers at home, for taking your time to be introduced to the Poor People's Campaign. If you didn't know about it, I know one of the most exciting things I've had in working with either the New Hampshire Councils of Churches or the Poor People's Campaign is the basic idea is that we're all in this together and we can go through this with a smile. It doesn't have to be as difficult. If we all treat each other like brothers and sisters and treat people the way we want to be treated, this would be such a more enjoyable journey. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Be healthy. Be safe.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.